Today, we're talking about something many of us avoid but shouldn't: death and end-of-life conversations. While talking about death can feel uncomfortable, it can also bring immense peace and clarity. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. Hi, Dr. Lakelyn here. Welcome to Caregiver Chats. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Home Instead, an honor company. I'm so glad you're taking the time to join me. These conversations are space for learning, reflection, and support. And I invite you to subscribe to Caregiver Chats on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, I love hearing from you. You can email me at any time at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. Today's episode is about a topic that touches every family, yet at some point often goes unspoken until a time of crisis. I hope this conversation encourages you to reframe how you think about end-of-life planning. It's not just about preparing for loss. It's about fostering connection, comfort, and a shared understanding. These conversations can be a gift, a way to honor a person's voice and values, even when they can no longer speak for themselves. Joining me today is Lisa Pahl, a licensed clinical social worker and co-creator of The Death Deck, a card game designed to spark meaningful and sometimes lighthearted conversations about end-of-life wishes. Lisa's work reminds us that bringing a little humor and playfulness into these conversations can actually help people open up, making a tough topic more approachable and even healing. So let's dive in. This conversation is about embracing what matters most, especially in life's most tender moments. Welcome, Lisa. I'm so grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm equally excited. I know that your work touches so many lives. Can you share with us what drew you to focus on hospice and end-of-life care?
Well, it's interesting you asked that because I'm currently doing this series on my social media that I created with my dad. He's really the reason that I got into hospice. So he was in his early 40s when he was diagnosed with hairy cell leukemia. I was about 19. And quite honestly, I'm ashamed of how I handled the situation. I was very fearful and I really avoided him in the hospital. And kind of, I had this cold that I milked a little bit to try to get out of seeing him because I just couldn't believe this was happening. I did end up seeing him, but he's lived with hairy cell leukemia now for 30 years. And through his diagnosis, he became an entirely different person. And he really took if you know you're going to die or think you're going to die, what do you want your life to look like? Are you leading the life that you wish that you had? And so he became an entirely different person. And so, early on in my hospice career, I didn't attribute me coming to hospice because of that. But I realized that I was trying to right this wrong, to be honest. And I found when I first was at the bedside of someone who was really sick and dying, it felt natural now. It felt comfortable. And I will say the other big piece is that I was raised on a farm. And so death was part of life. And so even though I was fearful of my dad being really sick, because I saw him as this huge, strong farmer, tough man, later when I matured, I saw a very different thing. And I felt like I could really support people in this way. And so that's kind of how I got into it is my dad. He's my inspiration in so many ways.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so interesting to hear how people come into their various fields. And when there's a family tie, that makes it even more meaningful. And I'm sure through your work, you've had the chance to connect with hundreds of families and walk alongside them. And my guess is that might be the inspiration for the Death Deck, which is something so unique that you started. And so could you tell us more about that? Because I think the title alone is very intriguing. And I'm sure our listeners are thinking, what is this Death Deck and what is it all about?
Yes, so you are correct. I've worked in hospice 18 years. I worked in emergency medicine for about 8 years. And in both settings, I saw time and time again that people just weren't having these conversations. And what that meant was when you don't talk about end of life and you don't talk about death and dying, when there's a medical crisis or a terminal diagnosis, and family members are thrust into the role of making decisions for their loved one or their family member, they're in distress. It's incredibly distressing to not know what your person would want. And so in the emergency room, for example, someone comes in with a massive stroke. They're in their late 80s. There's no advanced directive in place. There's never been conversations about how aggressive mom would want to be treated had she had a severely debilitating medical episode like this. So that was the inspiration. I partnered up with the spouse of a former hospice patient of mine. And so we had her perspective as someone who didn't have these conversations with their spouse. He was so young. He was in his 40s when he died. And so we created the Death Deck and then the EOL deck together. And now I'm the full owner, and she stepped away to do some writing and has a new memoir out. But we created these two products together.
Wow. You're right. I think so many people wait far too long to have these conversations. And so I love that you've created this tool to get people talking. And it is such an approachable way to have these conversations. And I know we're going to get into the kind of some examples of the deck in just a bit. But, I know you've mentioned that if families avoid this conversation, it really leads to a lot of distress. What are some of the other kind of consequences or realities of not planning ahead, not having these discussions, just to get families thinking about and motivated to have them?
Yeah. I could write an entire book on the consequences, but I do really understand how hard it is to have these conversations. In my personal life, I've been in situations where people just don't want to talk about the reality. And so I do understand it can be really difficult. However, there are a lot of consequences of not having these conversations. In addition to the distress of your family members, there's also conflict among family members. That's very, very common. I think
Absolutely.
Mom would want this. I think Mom would want that. There is also there's no do-overs in grief. And so there's a ton of second guessing in grief. I support my bereaved families through hospice. And I cannot tell you how many times people second guess decisions that they made. They second guess how they cared for their person because they had never stopped to ask them what they would want. And so now they're left with doubt. In addition, the bereaved can be left with a huge old mess. The practical aspect, if you take away all of the emotional aspect of what it does on your family system, potentially, there's the mess of paperwork and how much that impacts the grief process. I had the spouse of a patient recently, within the last few years, and he was young, in his 40s as well. And I was helping the wife with some of the after death tasks that were needing to be done because she was incredibly overwhelmed, paralyzed. And she just broke down and said, I don't feel loved by him.
Wow.
He said he took care of things that he didn't. I understand it must have been really hard for him to do that, but I didn't know. And I thought that these things were in order. And so now she was in a really horrible financial situation. She was she wasn't really able to even begin grieving because she was dealing with this mound of paperwork and in this grief fog. And so I don't say that to guilt people per se. But I do say that so that people really understand that you're really hurting your family when you don't take steps to handle things before you die. Some of those important things like making sure that you have a password manager or your passwords are written down. When people can't get into accounts, that's one of the biggest barriers to accessing funds and that sort of thing. Having a living trust or a will so that family members, having a living trust means you can avoid probate. Having an advance directive where you spell out clearly what you would want to happen, as well as have these important conversations, because really the conversations are what we can remember in those times. It's not really the piece of paper. It's, my dad told me, I'm going to haunt you if you ever put a feeding tube down me and don't you forget it. And so I remember that. And that gives me much more confidence than just seeing it written on paper.
That's so important. It's the combination of the conversations plus, of course, the legal paperwork that needs to accompany it. And some people just don't know, what an advance directive is or what a living will is. So I think, doing your research, connecting, whether it's with an elder law attorney or there are some online tools that can help families create these documents, but putting them together, while it can feel kind of daunting and overwhelming, as you mentioned, can be beneficial in so many ways from an emotional, a practical standpoint. And so I appreciate you sharing some of those examples because we never know when our time will come, and it could be suddenly, or it could be in a situation where there's a terminal diagnosis where we have that time. And so, again, I'm glad we're talking about this today. And I know that a lot of this hesitancy comes from just the stigma attached to the word death and dying. People in our society, we value youth and vitality. So I would love to get your perspectives on some of maybe the stigma and how that contributes to preventing families from having this conversation.
Well, at the start of the interview, you brought up the name of our game, the Death Deck. And when we first started talking about it, we, were sharing with friends and family and different people. We want to call it the Death Deck. And most people said that's a bad idea. Call it something nicer. And my business partner and I, Lori, we thought about it and we just listened to our gut and we said, no, we want to call it the Death Deck. We want people to know what they're getting into and we want to normalize this word. It's not a bad word. Life and death. It's death is part of life. It's and so I think there is this, I know there is the stigma of talking about death. Even within my hospice team, people don't want to say the word die or death. It's all pass away when they're gone. And it's like, I don't play that game. I say, when your loved one dies or when your family member dies, when your mom dies, you're going to call hospice. Because I think it's really important for people to be able to say the words, because when we use these euphemisms, we're distancing ourselves from the reality of death. And we're not, death isn't something to be scared. Sure, we don't want it to come too early when we have a lot of big plans and we don't want to leave our family members. But we all will die. And so this idea that we're all living in fear of this thing that's going to happen to all of us, it's kind of the biggest waste of energy we can have is to, avoid the topic of live in fear. So I was just listening to a podcast that hospice nurse Penny was on, and she was sharing about how before she became a hospice nurse, she had a lot of death anxiety. She lived with death anxiety. She was so afraid of it. And so when she became a nurse, she decided to face that by working in the field. And now she, has 1 million followers or something crazy like that on TikTok, but she's really talks a lot about reducing death anxiety and helping people who have that fear. And I think all of these new creative ways that we can reach people to normalize these conversations, to say, hey, it's not that scary. The body actually knows what to do when it's dying. It's like giving birth. It's a process. It's a labor. This is what happens. You'll have medications and people to support you. It's not that scary. So that's a lot of the message that so many of us in the field are trying to get out, that if we have these conversations, we can reduce some of the power. When you avoid a topic, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger in your head. And when you talk about it, you lessen the power it has over you. So that's what I do every day, all day, is just talk about death. And
well, and I think for many that are comfortable, it helps you live life fuller when you are able to talk about death and accept death, kind of like your dad, that new perspective that Lisa on life. And I appreciate all the advocacy that you do and people like hospice nurse Penny do to normalize the conversation. And I think also the word hospice has some stigma attached, and you probably know this better than anyone, families often wait too long to get onto hospice. And so maybe they only benefit for the last, week or even days of the person's life, when really they could be benefiting from the service and support that hospice brings for months and months leading up to that final day. And so if we're able to normalize the conversation, talk about hospice without it sounding scary, but really reinforce that it is a whole support system to walk you through that end of life. Because so many people, maybe they haven't experienced a death before. And so there's a lot of unknowns or those final signs of death. You talked about how our bodies know what to do. If you've never seen that or experienced that, just the fear of the unknown can be a lot. And so the hospice staff really walks alongside families to support them every step of the way. And I'll let you add to that as well, Lisa, because I know this has been your bread and butter, your career for so long. But I just hear from so many caregivers that they say, gosh, I wish we would have started hospice sooner.
I mean, I've heard that thousands of times. I'm not even exaggerating. And, the idea that, there's so many myths about hospice, that we kill patients, that they come onto hospice and they die right away. And the reality is they come onto hospice and die right away when they're referred late, or when they come onto service when they're already actively dying. And so if they die within 2 weeks, it makes sense because they were dying when they came on service. I have such a passion for hospice. I believe in the support that it can bring. You have a whole team of people, myself included as a hospice social worker, to meet the psychosocial and medical needs of the patient and family system, which is incredible. I would say I spend about 60 to 70% of my time supporting the caregivers, because oftentimes the patients are too sick to really have a lot of conversations with me, but the caregivers need support. And so I come in, I can sit with the caregiver, give them an hour and a half of my time where they can talk about the stress of caregiving, their concerns. We can walk through the dying signs or the end of life symptoms that their person's experiencing. If they're open, give them a hug. There's just a lot of support and compassion within hospice that I think is just deeply needed at end of life. And it really breaks my heart when people come on so late. I look at these families and it's like we're supposed to, as the team, get them ready for their person to die, sometimes within the day, within a couple days. And it's not fair to anyone, to be honest. It's not fair to the hospice team that is suddenly having to be sometimes the first person to say, your mom's dying. Like, we call everyone, like, we expect this to be a couple days. Well, the doctor told us it was going to be 6 months. I'm sorry that they told you that. It's frustrating in lots of different areas because so many of the reasons that people come on to hospice so late is because physicians aren't referring them. And so many people think that their physician knows best and they would have referred them to a service if they thought that it would help them. And that's just simply not the case in a lot of situations.
Well, I think, physicians aren't immune to the fact that death is scary, even though they work in the medical field. And so I think sometimes it's hard for them to tell the families too that your loved one is getting near the end. So I'm not trying to make excuses for the fact they're not referring sooner, but I think it just goes to show this stigma or this topic, it impacts us all. And I think that's why this education and these resources are so, so important.
No, I agree. And I know that I sometimes come on hard against physicians and yet I know and love a lot of physicians and know that they're doing their best. But it is really hard for families when they aren't given the accurate information, when they can't plan. People miss seeing their person or miss seeing someone they really want to say goodbye to because no one told them that they should say goodbye. So it is, what you're saying is very true. We need more education and training, and we need physicians to get a little braver, in my opinion. It's not easy. Even working in hospice for 18 years, I sometimes have to take a big breath when I know a family doesn't want to hear what I'm about to tell them, but I feel like it's my right. Or not my right. It's their right to know the information. And I'm not gonna. I'm gonna say I use clinical judgment if they're so far in denial that what I'm going to say is going to be horribly received. Then I may not be as blunt. It is all about finesse and basically meeting people where they're at and then gently leading them to more of the reality of the situation so that they don't feel caught out of the blue or missed opportunities to say the things that they want to say.
I think that, that could be a whole topic for another podcast, is things to say and those things to reflect on at the end of someone's life. But that is such a gift to be able to give to families, to have those final discussions and talks. And if somebody like you, a compassionate social worker from hospice, isn't willing to say, you only have a few days left, then families do miss those opportunities. And so I'm again so grateful that you've created this tool to really open up the door for these conversations and get families talking about them sooner. Some of the cards in your death deck, and then also your end of life deck, your EOL deck, they are those conversations, reflecting as a family, talking about people's wishes. So do you find that these cards really get people opening up? And do you use them with your patients on hospice as well?
Yeah. So yes, I find that I can basically pull any question from the 112 death deck questions, and there's going to be conversation. And even if it starts from a place like, would you live in a house that someone was murdered in? Okay, that doesn't seem like that would get to death and, wouldn't get very far in a conversation. But I can't tell you how many times that leads to people talking about spirits and loved ones who visit them and whether or not what happens in the afterlife and what people are afraid of in terms of death and dying, or experiences, near-death experiences that they have. And so we tried to, with the death deck, we tried to make a whole bunch of death-related topics with, about a third of it focused on advanced care planning. So we are really getting in there too. But we add some fun ones as well so that we can use those cards at like game nights with friends who might not be willing to initially start talking about how you want doctors to communicate with you if you have a serious illness. And so I like to start with the light ones. And then oftentimes they get to those conversations anyway, even without asking the ones that are more specific about advanced care planning. So I find that to be really fun. I use both decks with my hospice patients. The EOL deck is the deck that we designed to be used with people with serious illness and those approaching end of life. So people of advanced age, palliative care, hospice patients. So that's the deck, the little koala one. That's the one that I use with my hospice patients the most. However, the death deck, and you can see why I wouldn't necessarily bring this into every hospice home.
There's a more visual sign of the word death on that one.
Yeah. I mean, even myself as a, let's say, death ambassador knows not to do that. So what I tend to do is I slip some death deck cards into my some EOL decks. And I kind of have created my favorite cards, to be honest. And then I look at the family situation and what cards will play best for them. Some of my patients are really like blunt and have a wicked sense of humor, and they love the death deck questions. And so I tell people, don't rule out. I mean, I use humor so much in my work in death and dying. I laugh every day in most homes. And, there's so much opportunity for us to be human and have all of the feelings during these hard times. And laughter is such a release. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and as you have said, it can make people more open to have the conversation. So I would love, Lisa, to hear what some of your favorite cards are that you, ask your patients often. And I've gone through your decks as well. I have them and really enjoyed reading the different questions. And what's funny is my husband saw these on the counter and he goes, "Oh man, is there something you need to tell me?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing this podcast, but we should play this game and have these conversations because you never know." We actually haven't had, we have our living will and all those important documents together, but we haven't had some of the conversations on these cards. So while he might think that it was just for work, I think I'm also going to try to slip it into our next game night.
I think you should. People are often like, "Oh, I don't want to, like, really," they really will be like, "You want to do that? Can't we do something fun?" And the thing that I was most surprised about is that you feel so close to somebody when you're having these conversations, which I knew as a social worker. I knew that meaty conversations brings you closer, right? But I've played this game with hundreds of people that I don't know. And wow, the connected feeling that you feel after you hear someone share a story of their mom's experience on hospice or what they would want for their funeral. It's really connecting. And I feel like in today's world, we just need any moments of connection we can have. And so my husband and I have played with our friends several times, and oh my gosh, we don't talk about this topic with our friends, right? So there's so many fun conversations about like, what? That's what you like. I had no idea you thought like that, So it's fun, and it's not politics, and it's not, small talk. It's real stuff. So, I'll start off with one of my favorite questions. And I do ask this one sometimes of my hospice patients, depending on the person. Signs from beyond the grave are A, a comforting validation that souls live on. B, probably just a coincidence, I think, maybe. Or C, not real. Once you're gone, there's no way to phone home. So that's our card here.
That's a good one. I think that again, it's a little serious, a little playful. I like the mix that and the approach that these cards take.
What's your answer?
I think I definitely think that spirits can visit us. I don't know if I believe necessarily like in ghost haunting, but I feel like I have family members that have passed on. I have an uncle who died young and his name was Jay. And every time I see a blue jay, which we have a lot in our backyard, I feel like it's his presence and he's checking in. And so that's just one example. So I do feel like, people can be present with us even after they've passed. What about you?
I do too. When I first started working in hospice, I was more of a C. I was like, those are all coincidences. Those are all things people want to believe. And I think that that's still a piece of it. I think it feels good to believe these things and that plays a role. However, I have now witnessed so many things working with dying people and people like being in the room when someone dies. And there's just too many things that are unexplainable. And so I work with all these grievers who tell me all these stories of how their person shows up for them in these crazy ways sometimes,
Wow.
It's really, and the bottom line is I want to believe it too. It makes me feel better about dying. And so no harm in that.
Absolutely. Such a good card. I like how some of them are like the A, B, and C options, and then some are more reflective. One of my favorites in the reflection kind of category is, what life achievements are you most proud of? And I think that sometimes we don't stop to ask those types of questions of our loved ones. And so I would really like to ask this question of like my grandparents who are still living and my parents, and just hear their reactions. So, Lisa, what are you most proud of in terms of your achievement this far in your life?
Well, first I want to say, do that this weekend.
Yeah. Yes.
We get these great ideas and feeling kind of sentimental towards our family members, and sometimes we don't act on them. And what my work has really taught me is you just keep telling people how much you love them. Just, be interested in their stories, because they will be gone. And there's so many things that we never get around to talking about or hearing about. So that's my little encouragement for you. I think my greatest life achievement so far is the creation of these products. I feel really fortunate that I have been able to enter into this space where there's so many incredibly creative people. When I was working in hospice alone, I was feeling very fulfilled by the work, but it's really hard being at the bedside all the time. And so, with the Death Deck and my company being able to have conversations like this, I can reach so many more people. And, creating this series with my dad about death conversations, it's just so meaningful to me. And so I feel fulfilled every day, with what I'm doing. And I'm really happy about that. And feel like, when we think about the common regrets of those that are dying, I at least am doing what I love.
That's wonderful.
And so that makes me feel good. How about you?
Oh, I think this is a great question to reflect on. I'm pregnant with our second child. So I think for me, being a mom has been just something so beautiful and meaningful. And I knew it would be all those things. But now bringing a second little kiddo into our family, I'm just so excited to watch our family dynamics shift and grow in a really neat way. And family has always been really important to me. We have a big extended family, and so excited to add to the crew, keep adding to the crew.
Oh, well, I didn't say a mom because I have a 16-year-old and I'm not feeling that good.
Yeah, I'll check back in with you in about 12 years and then maybe I'll change my answer.
Yeah, I'm not feeling that accomplished in that area right now. So, but I used to.
That just goes to show that over our lives, we have achievements at different milestones, which I think is also beautiful to reflect on. Oh, well, I know we could go back and forth sharing these cards and our answers all day, which would be so fun. But I would love for you to share more about the Death Deck, where people can find it, how they can connect with you. I also understand you have a new set of cards coming out here soon, helping people continue the conversation in kind of the dementia space. So would love for you to share all of that with us.
Yeah. So I've been so excited about the response from the Death Deck and the EOL deck. When we first created these products, we didn't know if anyone would buy them. It's scary to put something out in the world. And every day I hear from people that have found it to be really helpful in starting these conversations. And again, that's super meaningful. And so you can find us at thedeathdeck.com and Amazon. To your question about our new deck, I'm really excited about this. It's actually a collaboration with Compassion and Choices. So Compassion and Choices has a really terrific tool called the Dementia Values and Priorities tool. And you can complete this and attach it to your advanced directive. And basically, it helps give guidelines of what you would like to happen if you were living with dementia, like what your preferences would be. And so I created the Dementia Deck loosely using some of their content from that and then creating some additional questions and basically just trying to help people plan ahead because so many people are fearful of living with a dementia diagnosis and what that might look like. And so we want to empower people to be able to share what's most important to them if they were faced with that illness. And, some of the questions are more related to decision making, and others are more related to comfort. What would bring you comfort if you were living with cognitive limitations? So it's I'm really excited about it. I feel like it will be helpful. The purpose is to have these same conversations, but a little bit more specific about dementia, as well as to get that dementia directive or values and priorities tools completed so that your family members can have some guidance later should you be living with dementia.
Well, I'm so grateful that you created that resource, Lisa, and I can't wait to get a copy of those cards as well, because, working with individuals and families in the dementia space is a passion of mine. And so often these conversations can be challenging, and people maybe are fearful of a diagnosis because they feel like, okay, well, what's next after a diagnosis? But that diagnosis can help people have these really important conversations before they can no longer maybe contribute to their wants, wishes, and desires or express those effectively. So I'm so grateful that you have created this deck and are getting people talking about kind of their wants, wishes, desires, and even if they are living with that specific diagnosis of dementia. And one of my recent podcast guests on episode 51, I had Adria Thompson, and we were talking about in dementia, family caregiving, that balance of safety and autonomy and comfort. And so I think it's so great that your questions, address that, what would be comforting to you as you kind of progress through this this disease process. And so getting families talking about that sooner leaves, again, just like we've talked about with the death deck and end of life deck, less, room for caregivers to question and doubt and ask, oh gosh, would my loved one would have wanted this? And so really excited that people will be able to get access to those cards here very soon.
Yeah. And I hope you'll play that with your parents as well, because
yes,
I had the opportunity. My parents are my guinea pigs. So, I've asked them my questions from the dementia deck, as well as had them complete their, dementia values and priorities tool through compassion and choices. And, I did it as well. And so did my brother. And all four of us almost had the same viewpoints. And
wow, how interesting.
90% of the questions. And I believe it's because we all watched my grandmother live with dementia for 9 years. And so we had things that we all liked in terms of the care, and all had things that we kind of wanted differently for ourselves if we were in that situation. And they were pretty much aligned. So that gave me huge comfort, because I thought, wow, I can go with my gut with my parents, because they were so aligned in this specific area. So I think it can provide people a lot of comfort in that way too. If you're sharing your responses, it can help just confirm, okay, mom doesn't want a feeding tube at that point, or okay, dad still, he doesn't want to be a DNR at any point of that diagnosis. So there's lots of ways that people can answer. And so knowing what people's choices are is the most important thing.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Lisa, oh gosh, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm so grateful that you have joined me today. As we wrap up, if our listeners could take away one thing, or if you could leave one last parting thought with them, what would it be?
Conversations give us confidence. We can do a lot of paperwork and put it in a drawer, and if no one knows what that paperwork says or what you meant by it, your family is not going to have confidence to make decisions on your behalf. And so I encourage people to be brave and start the conversation.
Thank you so much for that parting thought. And I double click on that. I think the conversations are so important, and hopefully people can use these decks to help them get these conversations started. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Lakelyn. I could have talked to you another 2 hours.
I know. We'll have to have you back sometime.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I want to give a heartfelt thank you to Lisa for such a compassionate and thought-provoking conversation. I hope today's episode encourages you to begin or continue these vital conversations with the people you love. Remember, talking about death doesn't invite it in, it helps us live with more intention and care. If this episode resonates with you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. And don't forget, you can always reach me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com with your thoughts or ideas. You can also follow us on social media at Home Instead Inc. for more resources and previews of upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening. And please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com to learn more.